Hello and welcome to Red's Business and Technology Podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Barnes. And today we're sitting down with our third ever returning guest, Craig Ford. Craig Ford is an veteran in the cybersecurity industry, just released the sixth novel / book, director of Cyber Unicorns. A lot's happened in the cybersecurity industry since 12 months ago when you were first on the show. So keen on unpacking your journey over the past year or so and find out what's been happening. So mate, thanks for coming in.
Thank you. It's definitely a pleasure being here again.
All right, so maybe let's start straight into Cyber Unicorns launch and journey. I believe it's been 11 months. Next month will be the first year in breaking out from what you're doing with Beta and obviously the book journey to you're just launching a small business effectively, which is no doubt a scary time. So just maybe if you can elaborate on the maybe why you started Cyber Unicorns and how the first 11 months has gone.
Yep, no, definitely. I think probably easiest way is to start right at the start, where probably our last conversation, I think we even included that in some of that conversation around sort of my passion in that cyber awareness and cyber education space, particularly I think the lack of it in general public, sort of your mums and dads, your seniors, your kids. And I sort of started it with the kids education book, which I sort of talked about in the last one on The Shadow, what I did with Katie Randall.
Yep.
Basically, I kind of was talking about it then. I was sort of thinking over it, and I was like, I just keep talking about it. I'm not actually solving the problem. And I'm a big person that I like to, if you see a problem, figure out how to solve it, which is the reason why I created the first few of my books. So stepped out of my reasonably comfortable CTO role with Biden. I still work with them a bit. I still think they're great people, but decided I'm going to make the plunge and created Cyber Unicorns very specifically for that cyber education space. So what I'm doing is Cyber Unicorns itself is a cybersecurity consultancy like most of the others, but with a bit of a difference. So essentially what I do is I do VCISO, so Virtual Chief Information Security Officer services with a couple of regular clients. I can name them. They're Wesley, PCYC and Ipswich Council, and I've done a bit with Hungry Jacks as well while they were doing their interim head of security sort of recruitment.
Yep.
But essentially what that does is that helps me fund the passion side of the project of why I created Cyber Unicorns. So I've built a full online cyber education platform aimed very specifically at the mums and dads, your seniors, your kids, and that sort of general public space. So at the moment, there's a full online back-end web training portal inside the Cyber Unicorns website. And then what I do is I've created, with quite a substantial investment from myself, an actual mobile app, which is going to be launched in, I think, about 3 or 4 weeks.
Awesome.
All fingers crossed, everything goes smoothly. But essentially what it will do is extend that capability. So beyond just video training, it'll have interviews like this one, sort of where I've been on sort of podcasts. It'll have YouTube clips where I've been on and done interviews, and then it's got those video training access to whatever subscription they sign up to, and then it'll have how-to guides of the basic, how to turn MFA on for social media, and all of those little things that we kind of need to teach all the general public and help
towards general public,
all to general public.
Yeah, right. Okay, so you're doing essentially cybersecurity consulting to businesses to therefore fund the back to
to sort of
individuals,
educate everyone individuals. Because my sort of approach is like I think we're doing a little bit better in that cyber education space for corporates. We're actually improving that space. We're making people a little bit more engaged. But if you're not in one of those big corporates, you don't get access to that kind of awareness training. Like, it's pretty minimal. I think the government's doing a little bit more now with some of their Act Now, Stay Safe, I think their campaign is. So they kind of just started that halfway through when I was building mine, which was going, hopefully they don't do all of it, but that's okay.
Yeah.
But essentially, I think if you're not in one of those large corporates, you're not really getting access to that training. So I really, as a bit of a passion, I want to push that education out to more that sort of general public, and particularly targeted to that, the senior groups, talking about your phone scams and things like that, and kids expanding beyond that first kids education book, but giving them a bit more of a collateral, a bit more information, and a bit more hands-on kind of guide from someone that's kind of been in it for a while. So
that's it's a good initiative, and something that I've heard from some businesses who may get cyber awareness programs for the business, and password managers and stuff as well. And sometimes they let the employees actually use that stuff for their personal accounts as well, get some different licenses and whatever else. That's great, actually, that it goes back to the individuals as well, because, not a fun time for people being attacked separate to businesses being attacked, right? Which is something on the show we don't really talk about a whole lot, to be honest with you. Most of that cyber world is targeted to businesses and their information and how to protect that, not on the poor individuals out there. So that's awesome, kind of a unique proposition. So you got started on it, but what's maybe the mission behind Cyber Unicorns? Is the long-term mission around that personal education?
I think probably around that sort of personal and maybe that small business space where I think we're not sort of really covering that. Obviously, I think I'll, at least for the next 3 or 4 years, I think I'll be doing the consulting and the cyber VCISO kind of role to keep sort of funding and pushing that along. I think my dream would be to, go out to schools, go out to seniors groups and literally provide some of those workshop education and use the platform as a companion kind of tool to sort of continue that education after the initial workshops and sort of push the education as much as I could. It's quite a big passion project of mine. Yeah. Not the easiest way, I don't think, to make an income out of. I think it's certainly easier consulting, but you got to take a bit of a risk and a bit of a dive for some stuff you're passionate about, I think. So. Yeah.
How was that, launch of the business and, breaking out from a comfortable, CTO kind of salary to starting your own business? No doubt you had the book stuff you were doing as well, so it wasn't like you were, just a fresh jump kind of thing, but still no doubt would have been some agony long nights and a bit of a hurdle to get started, right? What was that process like?
I was a little bit lucky, I think, with my sort of exit out of the Biden team. It was sort of, I'd been sort of talking about it for like a couple of months, and there was just, I think it was more luck than anything else. I had one of the VCISO clients potentially sort of come in and saying, we'd like someone to come in to help to do us this. Okay. And I'm like, I could maybe do that maybe as part of my exit, and we're already having that kind of conversation. So I think it was kind of an easy jump to give me a little bit of a sort of a safety net. But definitely a bit of a scary jump and a scary conversation with my wife initially of going, want to leave the nice comfortable job to, follow my passion project, which is, not always the easiest conversation, but she's been quite supportive. She's my other co-founder. So it's the wife and I sort of co-founded the Cyber Unicorn. So I think once we sort of started talking about why I wanted to do it and sort of, we have 2 kids ourselves and sort of having that conversation around what the education is and why we wanted to push it, she was like, it's a no-brainer.
It's not to dive into the personal life, but is your wife in the cybersecurity industry as well, or is she just more passionate about the education?
Passionate about sort of helping, particularly in the kids space, as our kids are sort of growing up in the space. And, I do have one kid, I won't go into too much around the ages, but sort of in that early primary space, and they're using iPads and things like that already in school. And we're like, we need to help with that education. And the book sort of started that with that sort of primary school age book, but I think we need to go beyond that.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to be done. My son, even on like YouTube Kids, sometimes he's like some ads come up and you're like, well, hang on, let's get there. And it's meant to be YouTube Kids and it's meant to be locked down so they can only see certain things or whatever. So there's a lot of room to be done. But probably also like, to businesses, that VCISO kind of role that you're fulfilling, there's also a gap there. The amount of security professionals in Australia is quite low compared to the work that needs to be done, as I'm sure you're aware. So you kind of be able to, help out in both areas, which is awesome. So I was going to touch on your unique lens of Cyber Unicorns, but I feel like you've kind of touched on that already, which is, kind of mixing your passion project in with a commercial cyber consulting business. So that's quite unique.
Probably awesome. The only extra part we could probably talk about there around maybe the VCISO side. I very much, I guess kind of along with my passion side, I very much aim most of my effort towards the, I guess you'd say, organisations that are aligned passion-wise. So it's, your Wesley Mission and your sort of PCYC, that sort of, they're doing that sort of not-for-profit space. They're in there doing some nice things. So I usually, and they're the sort of organisations I think I'll probably be long-term kind of focusing on as the ones that kind of need the help, but don't have the huge amount of funding or the demand to have that sort of full-time CISO kind of person there. So, and I think a lot of them probably need the help more than some of the larger commercial organisations because they don't have that prep. They need to sort of really focus down on those basics and get those right because they don't have the money to spend on some of the sort of nicer, flashier kind of tools that can sort of help pull that back a little bit if they're a little bit, maturity is a little bit off. But
yeah, I mean, we work with some non-profits as well, and I definitely see what you mean. Like just a commercial running a non-for-profit, right? You can't. Most businesses these days don't have a separate cybersecurity budget to a tech budget. You know, they've got your technology budget, and then there's maybe some risk for insurances and stuff. There's not a separate dedicated cybersecurity budget, and then not-for-profits are years away from that, to be honest, right? So they definitely all help they can get around that advice piece. And I know with some of the legislation changes around what directors on not-for-profit boards are being held liable for and so on, that it's even harder for people who sit on boards of not-for-profits. They want to take it seriously, but they also just don't have the funds to do it. So that's makes a lot of sense. Let's pivot towards the book, your sixth book you launched 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
Funnily enough, I think you were in here the last time was like the week after, or maybe the week of you launched was it your fourth book? But that time would have been
the fourth book. Yep.
Yeah. So maybe elaborate if you want what's the sixth book about? So
the book number 6, and I'm pretty sure it was book 2 in that sort of novel series. I think it was the cyberpunk hacker fantasy series, the Foresight series, which was when I was in here last time. I think it was almost 12 months ago. I think it was pretty close.
Yeah.
Essentially, Vulcan is sort of the third installment to that sort of series. That if anyone sort of that's sort of listening and watching is sort of had my book series, basically in the first 2 books of those series, I sort of lead female character Sam in the first book, teenage female hacker, your first person in her mind, sort of following a real hacker's journey and having a bit of a pen tester, ethical hacker background. It kind of helps sort of build out that skill set and sort of make it based in reality, I guess you would say is probably the right way to put it. With a bit of Hollywood flair, of course. But And then in book 2, in the one that just before I was on last time, Shadow actually switched to the bad guy's perspective, Shadow.
That's
and you
right.
sort of got into his mind and sort of followed his journey, and then they sort of mingled across and a bit of a spiderweb across their 2 stories, and then it continued along. And then I've switched back to Sam's character, which I think she would definitely always be the primary character, but I've sort of switched back to her in that sort of last book and continued the journey. But I'm told this one is the best one of all, so from a few of the readers that have done it, which is quite nice to hear, really. It means I'm sort of growing as the writer and sort of really building out that story, which is nice. So.
Awesome. And how the second book, been out now for must be about 12 months, how'd that go? How many copies sold and things did you end up getting for the second one?
I think overall, for the series, I think we're around that sort of, I think it's about 5,000 copies between the first 2, roughly.
Yep.
My most successful is probably the kids' book. I think we're up to retail sales of that. I think was probably the Shadow World was. I think it's about it hit 5,000 in the first couple of weeks. Copies, which was quite nice. So it's an Australian bestseller because once you break over that 5,000, it's an Australian bestseller in that first run. So
awesome.
But I've actually donated 6,500 of them myself to schools since we last talked. So it's quite good. Doesn't help the bank balance, but we won't get into that.
Yeah. Bit of passion project and a bit of commercial at the same time, by the sounds of it. So, and honestly, a great initiative for educating people in schools and so on. It can't be all reading Pokemon books and then just the study stuff, right? There's a bit of cyber education these days is super, super important. So let's maybe speak holistically around the cybersecurity industry in the last 12 months. What do you think's changed? What have you seen?
I think the conversation, I think there's a lot more conversation around it, particularly in that sort of board level and the C-suite level that you were talking about before. I think because of some of the mandates that sort of come from the government and some of their push to sort of, I guess, improve cyber maturity across, I'm having a lot more conversations on that higher level than I probably would have before, or at least, maybe not more, but at least more grounded conversations where they really want to make a bit of a difference. Before it was, yes, let's talk about it. Not sure if it's something we're going to really push as the highest sort of value agenda, but they seem to have that sort of right approach to it now. So I think they're paying more attention, I guess, is the right way to go to. Probably a little bit to do with it's more going to be their responsibility and come back to them a little bit more than it used to be. But I think the conversations are definitely there and people are wanting to make that maturity uplift and really push it as an agenda, particularly like your big corporates. They were always kind of moving down that path and they were trying to at least appear like they were doing good in that sort of space. But that even that mid-enterprise market, I find, is really starting to mature in that space, or at least start to have more of those conversations, which is nice. But
yeah, I'm hearing a lot of businesses wanting to talk about it more, and like things like awareness and such are getting more common practice. And people transitioning from just an antivirus is not good enough to you need something a bit more. I'd say one problem that I'm seeing in the industry, and I'd like to get your feedback on this, is the almost level of confusion when someone, even like an internal CIO, for example, goes out for a security service or some detection response capability. all the acronyms, and like, you know, we try and educate people we speak to, like our customers, around, you know, difference between EDR, MDR, and XDR, and all those other kind of acronyms in that industry. It gets quite confusing, to be honest, and it almost means you just throw it all in the bin and start again. But all these marketing companies from you know, not to name individuals, but certain brands say there are other things, and it must be so confusing for someone on the buying side of security services. What advice would you have for someone like that?
I think you're 100% spot on with it, particularly with the acronyms. There is so many of them. And you hear it from all the conversations, like they're going, half of them don't know what they mean. And like, what do we actually need? And a lot of the time, you know, particularly on the vendor side, and I won't name any either, but you see a lot of them where they sell those flashy, blinky light solutions going, oh, this is the newest thing, you need to get it. And they've probably been doing a similar thing for the last 2 years anyway.
Yep.
They've just named it something new and, you know, put a new pretty little bow on it, which doesn't help anyone if you ask me. But I find usually what I do is I ground it in whatever the problem is. So forget all the solutions, forget all the, you know, whatever they're trying to sell in the next marketing push. Just go, what are the problems you actually have? And let's go, how do we solve this? What is the real solution to solve this? What is the right way to go down? And sort of take out all the acronyms and the noise and everything else and go, you know, do we have problems with passwords being leaked out? Do we have a lot of a password issue? Let's talk about password managers or something that will solve whatever that problem is. But forget whatever the latest marketing spin is, or AI, or whatever you want to, which is machine learning most of the time, but we won't get into that either.
Yep.
But literally just try and ignore the buzz and go, what is the foundation things here? What are our problems? Let's figure out whatever the warts are, and let's talk about the warts and go, so how can we solve those?
Let's speak to maybe the security services piece more than holistically, right? Let's say you identify that, hey, we've got no detection response capability at all on endpoints, infrastructure, network, cloud, anything. And you said, okay, we need to get a solution for that. Or maybe you had, you know, someone like yourself coming in and a vCISO capability around, you need some detection response capability. What would you ask the vendors you meet with, or the potential partners or businesses you're looking at, transacting with around security services? What questions would you ask?
Particularly around the sort of that mid to smaller enterprise, usually particularly around that incident response capability space, sort of your MDR, managed detection response or something. It usually comes back to around helping you educate the small team you have to make you prepared for some of these stuff. So making sure it's not just a one way, here's your alerts, there's the answer, we've solved it. How about we actually talk about this? What happened? Where was the chain that sort of went through, and help educate your team, whether they're going to be instant responders or not. You kind of need your team to understand where these sort of risks are and where the vulnerabilities are and what they're doing to solve them, so that, you know, when we're talking about it and when we're looking to sort of improve some of the maturity overall, you can come back and go, if that vendor or the provider or whoever the solution provider is in the services space, if they're not, you know, I've seen a few where they're sort of one-sided. They very much, I get your alerts, I take the feed, I fix it. There we go, we're done.
Here's a tool, here's a report,
here's a tool,
see you
that's
later.
it. Yeah. And don't really sort of go in it. But you need one that will be a bit more proactive with training. Training is not exactly the right word, but sort of uplifting
enabling your internal team. It's good advice.
Yep. Because I think even though technically it kind of feels probably to the vendor that they're kind of, you know, taking a little bit of their own work out of it, but I think overall they'll actually get a stickier customer because you're teaching them and you're helping them and you're improving their skill set inside their team, so that, you know, you'll probably get less alert fatigue from your side. You're not pulling in, but you're still getting the same service because you're helping them and they're sort of bouncing off you and you're bouncing off them. And, you know, I think it actually creates stickier kind of client. But yeah, they don't always agree when you have that kind of conversation. I don't know, we just provide the service, give you a report. And I'm like, no, that's not what we need. We need a little bit more.
You're a security partner.
Yes.
Right? And someone's going to enable and empower the internal IT team or business to, you know, people responsible for technology and that data and so on to, you know, better respond and do something with the information that comes back. That's great advice. And I think, likens to Steve Jobs used to say about the product development at Apple. You need to cannibalize your own product every 12 months. So you need to be almost like, you know, what problems are you solving? And then, you know, what problems are going to come in the future and how do you solve those? So the last model is almost obsolete compared to the next one, right?
So that's our job, right? Like literally as security people and vendors, we're supposed to be solving the problem. And I think that's part of our industry issue, I think, at the moment, is, from what I see, is we're kind of on this loop. We keep going around and round and round, sort of spinning the wheels, but not solving a lot of the overall major problems. So I think, we need to figure out how to fix the foundation stuff a little bit better and then, slowly improve the maturity from there. But we're not even really sort of mastering the basic stuff, I don't think, a lot of the time, which is sad. That's what we need to fix.
And also almost like dumbing down the acronyms and things like we touched on before for small business, either CFOs or like an IT manager in a small business or something, so they can get the cyber industry and kind of go, right, I got these gaps, I need to fill these gaps with these things, and without going, to market and just a million acronyms and different ways of tackling all these problems. But I mean, who would you be CISO for if there was no all of these challenges, right?
That is technically a point. I almost got to do myself out of a job. But
yeah.
And I think that is strangely kind of what we need to do as the vCISO or a CISO or whatever it is. Your job is literally to kind of get the organization to a point where they don't really need you anymore.
Yeah.
And that is literally our job.
Yep.
To make it sure that they can understand and they can sort of keep continuing on that journey and then call me whenever they need me. Other than that, I'm out the door kind of thing. I'm just sitting there as they need it. And sadly, I think that is kind of mostly my job, is to sort of push that direction. In a weird kind of way, do myself out of the job. But it's like the Steve Jobs thing, isn't it? You've got to keep sort of, solving your own problems and fixing whatever the next line of problems is.
The good ones do. And I work with a lot of CIOs, and I kind of tell them that most CIOs, the brutal truth is that after 3 years, the value they provide back to the business is a lot less than it was when they first started, because usually a CIO comes in and evaluates everything, gets to the team, he builds a team, fills in gaps, gets a plan, executes it over 3 years. And after that, really just doing incremental changes. It's not like a new CIO coming in and making huge improvements. So you almost need to change every 3 years as a CIO these days. So let's flip it back to, let's say, small business owner or a CFO in charge of IT or a general manager or so on. And you don't know where the gaps are in your current cybersecurity or with cybersecurity holistically for your business, where the gaps are with your systems or wherever they are. Where should they start?
Usually what I do in any of those sort of where are we at kind of conversations, when those sort of initial ones, is usually I say, do you know what you even have to start with? Have that sort of asset conversation on, this includes, software as a service kind of systems. What software do you have? What computers do you have? What phones do you have? What tools do you have? And who uses them? Once you can lay that all out and actually understand, particularly in the small business space, because they sporadically probably add staff, remove staff, what tools do they have? What phones do they have? Where are things connected? And, who has access to what? They kind of need to know all of that first before they can figure out what to do with anything next. So I think usually what I do is I go, let's figure out what you got exactly, so you know exactly the systems, the data, the software, where things sit, and then go, now where is your crown jewels? Where is your biggest amount of data? What is your biggest risk? And sometimes that could be, your CRM or something like that. But just figure out whatever it is or wherever it is your data that you need to protect is, and create that as your first point. If you can help tighten that down, restrict who has access to it, remove data. Sometimes I think a lot of sort of businesses just collect date of births, license numbers because they feel like they might need it one day. But if you don't need it, don't have it. Validate, check the ID when you first get them, sign it off, don't keep it. Easier said than done.
Talk
about that one for a while.
Tell the marketing team to delete
they won't do that.
lists, not happening.
But literally crunch down on that, exactly what they got, what is the valuable part, and focus on that specifically. Put your money in there, put your time in there, and just narrow that down and sort of secure that as best as possible. And because particularly when you're talking about that small business space or even that mid-sized business space for 50 or less probably staff, a lot of them don't have unlimited sort of funds to sort of put into some of this tech space. So I think just narrowing it down and knowing where your biggest risk is, and then sort of looking how to protect that. And usually someone like a vCISO or your IT sort of company provider can sort of come in and help you sort of understand some of that. And it doesn't have to be overly complicated. It can be nice and simple. Put it in a spreadsheet if that's the easiest way they can do it. Just figure out where it is, what you've got. Simple steps. And make sure backups. They never have backups and they never test them. And it's one of my little irks. I've been talking about it for about 5 years. It's like, make sure they are, make sure they're there, make sure you test that you can actually restore things from it, because that's usually where they get caught up, particularly with ransomware, which is still a problem. They aren't doing that testing, and they aren't sort of segregating it so that when the ransomware infection comes, bye-bye for their backup, which is quite a painful spot to be in. But yes, I think, crown jewels, know where they are, know exactly what you've got, because you can't protect what you don't know what you've got.
Yep.
particularly when you're talking IoT kind of space. You got people bringing smart fridges in, and I think there was a casino a few years ago from the thermometer in their fish tank that they were actually done through their Wi-Fi network. Yeah, so it's
thermometer in the fish tank. I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, so it's basically they had a IoT thermometer in the fish tank.
Yeah.
Got into their network, it was connected on the same Wi-Fi network as the corporate network. They got through in a casino, US, I think it was, but yeah, it's so IoT is particularly those smart devices like your smart speakers and things like that, when they are literally connecting them on the same corporate Wi-Fi network, and they're not telling anyone. But if you don't know they're there, you can't protect from it. So create a separate guest Wi-Fi, connect those kind of devices on the guest Wi-Fi.
Yep.
Not on the corporate.
Yeah, but I mean, as you know, small businesses usually aren't getting done by IoT from fish tanks. It's mostly the boring stuff, right? Patching and MFA and backups and the basic stuff.
Yep.
What advice do you have for businesses around, or what's changed more so in the last 12 months since your last, around cyber frameworks?
I think there's been a lot more focus towards the Essential 8, which I think is a good start. I think my sort of direction is sort of, let's go down the ISO 27001 kind of path, but sort of couple it with the Essential 8. So you've got your controls on one side and your framework on one side. So you've got good with your policies, your foundation stuff, and then you get your controls in place on the other side. So sort of combining them together a little bit. But I think they're coming up more in a conversation. I don't know if it's from the government push a little bit. They're sort of trying to sort of move that direction and sort of become a little bit more compliant. I love the fact around those sort of compliance conversations now, they're not using it as a tick box as much.
Yeah.
It's more, we actually want to uplift our maturity a bit.
Secure, yeah.
So the way it's approached now is a little bit changed. Instead of I just want to tick the box to say I'm now compliant and I'm just going to step away and that's us done. They actually want to have the conversation and sort of really move that needle, I guess you'd say, in the maturity, which I find quite good. I think it's quite nice. But
all these news horror stories and
it's enough to scare everyone, right?
People in black hoodies on 9 News and stuff is great for scaring people, I guess.
Sadly.
But there is some bad stories as well. Like I know there was a transport business that was in business for 30 years. At the start of this year, it with ransomware, no way to recover, and actually fully had to close doors after 30 years in business, right? So, and there's all the big massive news stories you hear. So it is definitely a scary thing, even though we mock it a little bit. But it is pretty crippling for businesses. What is your advice around the maybe best practice for small to medium-sized businesses around cyber awareness? You said that was a big passion you've got for businesses and personal users. But for a business, let's say 100 people in the business, and they have one in IT and an outsourced provider. But the actual education piece, is it just have a monthly thing go out from the SharePoint form? Is it how often should you do a phishing attack? And what does best practice look like for security awareness?
I think from my sort of perspective, from what I've sort of seen, I think generally most corporates do that sort of you'll get your video once a month or even once a fortnight, depending on the organisation, and they sort of some of them are funny and some of them really get sort of bring people in and engage them. But I don't think that on its own is enough. I think what we need to do is probably a once every 6 months or once every 12 months, bring in someone to actually do a conversation or a workshop and interact more directly, and not necessarily go over the same kind of stuff, because that would be boring. They'll sort of zone out, but maybe tell them a few stories and sort of break down how things would really happen in the real world, and sort of engage them a bit more, get them to have some of the conversations around what they've seen. And it's a little hard to get them to open up, but I find if you yes, given the standard basic kind of awareness, MFA's on, what are you doing with passwords? Can you spot these kind of scam emails? Yes, they're all great, and we need to keep drumming that in until they actually remember it, which, for someone that's not technical, a lot of that stuff takes a while for them to settle in. That's not their normal sort of space. And I think two things probably is we're not reinforcing it with some more interactive kind of conversations like the workshop style. And then I think we need to do a bit more targeting depending on, because those sort of videos and that training is just very generic. So I would say if it's an accounting firm, make sure that you do some of those workshops and target it around the wording and how they would say things, and more specifically around how they do business, and sort of approach it so that it's in their sort of standard flow of work and what they would actually recognise in their sort of day-to-day. Make a scenario that they would go, this is what I would do in my day job, and then make it a story where someone get caught out somewhere in that process. So it goes, oh, hang on, this could really actually happen to me. So you need to get that personal buy-in somehow, not just the generic look. But
how do you do that though these days? Because most of the awareness platforms you can get, right, they're all pretty generic. And sometimes you can customize it for the accounts team and those other things. There are solutions out there, but majority is fairly cookie cutter, so you can do it at masses and keep it up to date, right? Because phishing and so on, kind of scams are evolving in the way they target people and so on. So if it's tailored as well, I mean, who's going to create all this kind of content? How do you make it tailored?
I think it's the two things. Like, you have to have probably someone come out. So you would have like your standard sort of awareness. You would get your monthly sort of feeds, have that content come out. You can do some of them do a little bit of customization depending on the industry, which is great. But to have that, keep going that process, keep that on. But once every 6 months or 12 months, get somebody out that actually, can be from the security team that sort of works and sort of helps you with your team, and sort of get them to do a workshop or do a scenario and make sure it is in as less jargon as possible, which not too easy sometimes when you're actually talking about security people coming and doing these things. But you need someone that understands the process and what will happen, but someone that can actually speak the right language to sort of translate a little bit and make it a bit more friendly, but make it that interactive style, but make it in person, bring them in. I find it's better if they're not too larger groups, they'll open up a little bit more, but depending on the size of your organization, that makes it a bit harder, and you might sort of need the larger size groups. But definitely a combination of both. In person, actually physically get someone to come out and have that kind of conversation. Depending on the organization, like it's going to cost a few $1,000s probably to get someone to come out if it's from an external place. But I think the investment in crossover, you'll actually get more buy-in and you'll get more sort of interaction, particularly if they understand that personal risk to them. And I think that's one thing I always encourage, because in the general training and awareness that you do, it's always essentially focused around the business, which it needs to be, around sort of your day-to-day business operations. But if you, in say some of those workshops and some of those other training interactions, you can give them a connection to help them in their own lives, it'll give them more of a buy-in of why they need to understand the awareness education and the risks and what's happening. Because if you can make them more safe at home, you are making them more safe at work. So it's a kind of a win-win situation where you can invest a little bit in helping them understand how to be safer at home, but also be safer in the business. So it's trying to find that right balance in the middle. But
So your advice is at least annual, if not 6 monthly, ideally small groups, have that in-person kind of training, focus a little bit on the personal side, not just the business side, and then still do the regular, cyber awareness, email out, this is what a phishing email is, this is what a master domain is side. What's your thoughts in 2024 around the simulated phishing attacks? How frequently should you do those?
Like, I definitely think they're a good idea, because they kind of set a benchmark. I don't think I hate how I've heard a few organisations use them as a bit of a stick kind of thing. When people click on things, I don't like that approach. I think it's more around understanding where your risks are a little bit as an organisation. So know where your vulnerable groups are, so you can do a bit more of a targeted training to sort of suit those. But I would say at least sort of every year you should probably by quarter at least do some sort of simulation testing and send it out and sort of see the statistics where your groups are, which different departments are sort of a little bit more susceptible. I always find marketing, not to pick on marketing, but they always seem to click on a bit more, but it's because they get more stuff too. So they're used to getting a lot of a volume usually of sort of random sort of reach outs and things like that. So that I found sometimes they will click a little bit more than others, but if you can find the right balance and sort of help them see the cues, they will be some of the ones that quickly learn. So they'll sort of reduce that number quite fast. But target down on which individual departments, sort of find what they're sort of susceptible to, tailor a little bit more to target and see how they respond to certain things. And then you can do those sort of custom workshop kind of thing on that particular department and go, don't name anyone, don't sort of shame anyone, but go, hey, here's a new type of scam come out, and we're going to teach you how to sort of react to this and how to spot them, and sort of just tailor it more specifically to how they're sort of the things they're susceptible to, and do a little bit more personal approach. Yeah,
that's great advice. Not every business can tailor it to individuals, but the much as you can do, the best, right? But I think key is just putting something in place to for your employees to get a little bit cyber conscious. Something we've seen is like the frequencies will be higher of attempts of phishing attacks trying to get in, and a lot more around third party supply chain risk. Company they work with. One of the suppliers or something, then they get compromised and they get an email back, and then it kind of goes from there. They kind of
it's a vicious circle, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of chain goes around. It's pretty crazy. So you need to stay pretty alert, and even if it isn't, if it's a trusted source, you still need to be I guess, wary of what links you click and that kind of stuff these days.
Particularly around that AI, like if you're talking about the advancement in the AI functionality, and like a lot of the time we were, particularly phishing kind of emails, we would sort of show the points you would normally pick out, the bad grammar, the way things are formatting with the malicious actors capability with some of that AI tooling now. Even if, so there's some theories that, they deliberately made them to drop the low-hanging fruit. They made them in that bad sense, but I think it was just, not their first language. I think a lot of the time, I think it was just the way it was. But now with some of those tools, they're making them a lot more like the real ones, a lot more like the functionality, and the grammar is almost perfect.
Yep.
So I think they're going to be a lot harder for us to spot. So I think, we're definitely going to have to adapt a little bit. But
yeah, got to improve in that space, which is good. There's companies like Cyber Unicorns, right? Almost a good segue. Let's pivot back to the book writing process. Now, you've written 6 books now. Maybe just elaborate on the process you go through when writing a book and how it's evolved over the years. Obviously, your first one would have been different to writing the one that just got released 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, very different. Particularly like the first one I wrote, the Hacker I Am series, was the first 2 books were self-published. So I was, created what I wanted to do is I created, I think it was 50 topics in each, and they were just around specific cyber topics. And it's because I hated cybersecurity books. So I literally wanted to remove all that jargon we were talking about before and make it more approachable.
Yep.
So they were my, I guess you would say, easy for me to write because they were my natural topics, my natural way to write things. And I'd sort of been doing sort of cybersecurity articles for a little while once I started that first book. So it was sort of a natural one. But when I decided to do the first novel, the hacker novel, I think I was quite nervous. I wasn't sure how I was going to go. And particularly around the memory of trying to push everything in and the spider web I had a plan to kind of make. And I'm like going, I got to try and remember all this and make sure it all lines up. But I was a little nervous, but literally I wrote the Foresight, the first one, in 3 months in my daily train commutes.
Really?
Yeah, literally my the place I've written probably the most of my books is my daily train commute from the north side down to the city. It was literally, I could write a chapter basically from getting on to getting off. It was basically a draft. I would just
you just headphones on a laptop and just whack out a chapter.
Yep. And
interesting.
Literally when I sort of started the book, the process, what I do is, I think they call it there's 3 different types of writers. I think there's a pantser one that does no planning at all. And then there's one in the middle, I don't know what they call it, but then there was one that, particularly maps out every single detail before they start to write. So I'm in the middle. So what I do is literally I would write the first sort of 20 chapters, I would write probably a sentence on each of what I wanted out of that first half of the book in those first chapters. So it was like, roughly I want this to come out of each of these chapters.
Right.
And then literally I would write. And then once I got to that, I guess you would say that halfway point of the chapters where I form, this is roughly where the story would get to by here. And then I go by gut and write how I feel and how I feel the story is forming and coming together, which sounds a great idea. And, it actually flows quite well, but it's a bit of an interesting way to do it. And I've talked to a few other writers and they go, oh, that's an interesting way to do it. I don't know how you do that, but literally that's how I write. And apparently I'm told that writing in current time in first person in the mind of the person that the book is one of the hardest ways to write, which I didn't know until after I wrote it that way.
Okay. Oh, right.
So
there you go.
It's a little funny, but literally I was writing them basically those first 2 or 3 months each approximately.
Wow.
And literally it's 12 months for the editing process. So the editing process takes longer than the actual
12 months for editing process.
12 months to do it a turnaround until it's published. So
that's a long time. Honestly, writing any cybersecurity book, things change so quickly in the industry. The editing makes like a year long. That's crazy. So we're almost out of time, so I might just wrap up. But maybe next, what's the plan long term with Cyber Unicorns? Is it just yourself? And you mentioned your partner. If you got other people in part of the team already, you build up to be a fully staffed cybersecurity consultancy with 20 employees in a year's time, or are you planning on staying small, doing your passion project on the side, back to educating personal people? What's the plan?
I think probably like there's 2 of us at the moment. We have 2 contractors that do a bit of work for us as well as sort of an ad hoc sort of basis. But I think short term, probably over the next 12 to 24 months, I think probably it will stay reasonably small.
Okay.
I want to sort of do a bit of a push for that sort of cyber education side. So that's sort of the focus, I guess, to start with. But I think the consulting side, I think I'll grow to a little bit, just in that probably stick to that VCISO more, helping those smaller, not sort of profit space. But I don't think my plan is ever to be 20 or 50 strong. I think I'd like to sort of stay that sort of smaller organisation, maybe long term, if the education side goes really well, maybe grow that space, do a lot more education, because particularly around schools and small business space, I would love to do more in that and sort of help uplift that maturity. I've just got to get my online platform to fund that, and that'll be nice.
Yeah. That's exciting. And you said that was getting released. How far away is that?
So the online platform itself, like the web portal side, it's now
Cool.
sort of available. It's basically $9.99 a month for a mum or dad to sign up. Seniors to sign up for a month, or $99 for a year. And the mobile app version of it, which I think will make it a lot better. I think the functionality and the capability and just the fact that you can just take it with you anywhere you want and do some education. I think the mobile app is, I think, about 3 to 4 weeks, as long as there's no holdups in the sort of the publishing side with Apple and with Google. And their process isn't always easy to get through. But
How are you incentivizing people? A big thing in business, right, is trying to get people to actually do the cyber awareness training. How are you going to get individuals to get buy-in to do training, to engage in the platform and do all the modules and so on? What's your strategy for that?
I think generally probably is doing some of those workshops. I'd like to sort of, get involved in some of, like your Rotary and things like that, and sort of try and get out there and sort of provide some of those initial, workshops on cyber education, and go here to extend your sort of, your lessons and continue learning. Here's a subscription, maybe even discounts and stuff like that to try and sort of bring them in. But I think, although it sounds slightly weird, I'm not that concerned if I don't make a lot of money from the education platform, as long as it's sort of covering itself and I keep continuing to grow that education space. I think as long as, can keep putting food on the table and it keeps covering itself, I think that's more my mission, and sort of pushing it out into those groups that really need it, particularly that senior space and your mums and dads. They sort of don't know a lot. They don't really know what they don't know, I guess, at this sort of point. So I'd like to really push that as much as possible. And I think the workshops is how I'm going to do that, like sort of try and get in with Rotary and a few others like that to try and sort of help sort of spread some of that knowledge and that education. But I think my other sort of general plan is I'm going to join up with a few not-for-profits and help provide licenses via them through to some of their sort of, the vulnerable groups and stuff like that. But I think I've got to build up the consulting side to fund some of that. But that's more my philanthropic kind of side of thing, or I'd like to sort of, help push some of those licensing and use the platform to push that passion agenda, I guess you would say.
Awesome. Well, let's we'll have to get you in another maybe 6 or 12 months and see how it's all kind of gone with the launch of the app as well, and the platform.
Fingers crossed it goes well.
People listening, he's crossing both fingers. So we'll have to get you back in and see how it's all gone, and then maybe we'll book 7 or 8 by then. We'll see how we go.
I'm writing number 7 now, so you'll see, and I'm already starting to put the thoughts together to do a teenage version of my primary school age kids education one. So I'd like to sort of cover that slightly older market group as well. So
Awesome. Craig, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. Good to catch up.
Thank you. It's great chatting.